Teach Meet 9. We are all streaming to you from Victoria, but you might be somewhere different. And I think what's happened in the last week is that we've all gone back. We've all gone back to school and we've all met our students back face to face. And that's a really big deal for us as teachers.
We are all
my sound's on. Sorry, everyone. Let me put myself on mute. Victoria, but you just did the unmentionable. It's going to echo back for a second, isn't it? And I think what's happened in the last week is that we've all gone back. Sorry. We'll wait that out.
We survived.
So we've got an hour together tonight, and each of our presenters have 7 minutes for their presentation. So nice, short, snappy presentations that they hope they're going to share some stories or help you get prepared to go back to face to face. Before our first presenter kicks us off, we'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. Thanking you. Awesome. So I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land that I live, work and meet you on today. I'd like to pay my respects by acknowledging the elders of both past, present and emerging of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to all in our Teach Meet learning community who are Indigenous, who are present. They may be watching online now or maybe even watching later. In the spirit of reconciliation, we extend this acknowledgement by inviting you to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where you join us from. So if I could invite everyone who's online at the moment to contribute to this and add in the YouTube chat and tell us what country you're standing on right now. We gather for our Teach Meet as educators, teachers and leaders. Indigenous stories, songline and history are important teaching traditions of this nation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Olivier, and first I just need to fix a little thing here. No, there. Okay, that'll be better. So my name is Olivier. I'm a French teacher in Melbourne, in the Inner East, and I'm a PhD candidate at Monash University researching motivation in foreign language learning. My talk today centers around my reflections on the work of two educational psychologists. The first one is Albert Bandura, and the second one is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, both of whom actually passed away this year, and both contributed critical work in understanding why and how people learn. And some of the concepts they developed had an important influence on my own thinking during the length of my PhD, and consequently as well for my practice as a language teacher in a classroom. I'll begin with talking a little bit about Bandura and his concept of self-efficacy, and then I'll move on to Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory. And finally, I'll draw on some of my own reflections about our return on site and how the research of these two people might actually inform us and how to negotiate this sensitive time. So Bandura developed the idea that people who perceived themselves as competent in a domain were more likely to be successful in it and motivated to engage with the challenges posed in the journey of mastery. And this concept was labeled self-efficacy. It feels pretty evident nowadays, of course, that that one's beliefs in one's capacity to achieve learning goals is motivating and conducive to success. Bandura really helped place the idea in theoretical and empirical terms. He suggested that self-efficacy stemmed from 4 sources of information, which you can see here on the slide. There were, to begin with, the experience of having been successful in engaging with in the task, in engaging with a particular task. There were vicarious experiences or the success of peers, which leads us to believe that we can also succeed where they have. Verbal persuasion, which is or positive or encouraging feedback from people who actually know their stuff. And positive affect or positive emotions in engaging with the learning. So basically enjoying what you're doing. This notion of self-efficacy has found echoes in similar concepts, perhaps sometimes labeled differently. So I'm thinking, for example, of of self-determination theory, which is still very much influential in this field of research. And there it's labeled competency instead of self-efficacy. But self-efficacy was part of a larger theory of human agency. And this notion stuck particularly in the continuous demonstration of its connection with engagement, motivation, and success. Csikszentmihalyi's theory, flow theory is a pretty simple idea as well. The tasks are dependent on the level of difficulty of the task as a function of the person's abilities. In other words, Csikszentmihalyi reminds us that the task needs to be challenging enough to be achievable with some difficulty. But of course, the key is that it needs to be achievable. The person needs to be able to imagine themselves succeeding. Csikszentmihalyi also describes different affects in task engagement dependent on those two criteria. Well, I'm sure that you can see that a person's perception of their own ability to complete the task is inherent to flow theory. However, Csikszentmihalyi was the first person, to my knowledge, who looked at engagement task level, as opposed to a larger motivational or psychological tendency. Looking at both self-efficacy and flow, remind me that motivation is not an overall feeling or is it a moment-by-moment thing, but it's in a temporal spectrum, so to speak. And most recent theories in motivation point to the dynamical interactions between motivation and scales. I'm going to keep that aspect for another Teach Meet. What's perhaps more pertinent today is what we can take from Bandura and Csikszentmihalyi's ideas in our on-site returns. Bandura made clear that a person's perception in their own abilities has a lot to do with past experiences. Our returning students' last 2 years of education in Melbourne and in many other places in the world have been pretty checkered. So a lot of interruptions, plans made that couldn't take place, shifting test formats, challenges in accessing learning material, social isolation, and for many as well, a direct contact with the virus and the contradicting discourses around which might have caused heightened anxiety. In that context, previous self-perceptions as learners could well have been destabilized. Additionally, at task level, challenges in accessing the material and communication limitations on Zoom or Teams would have made difficult for the teachers to gauge task challenge levels and assess with accuracy the students' abilities. With these destabilized self-efficacy, and chances are that students themselves were unsure how well they would be able to complete those tasks. I expect that a significant number of my students have uncertain points of reference in terms of their own capacity to learn, due to the ongoing disruptions of the last 2 years and the loss of a lot of immediate feedback. I expect also that I will need to revise my own expectations. In fact, expectations were central to conversations at faculty and sub-school meetings at my place of work. I assume that this would have been the case across many other schools around the globe. Even with a few short weeks left, though, we can reset. We can help students find that sense of self-efficacy again, and perhaps find the conditions, the best conditions for them under which they can engage with the work. Oh, sorry, went a bit too fast. In terms of, excuse me, I'm just moving on a little bit. In terms of self-efficacy, just help your students set goals and be transparent. Show them that what the program is for the next few weeks and what the learning intentions are. Try to differentiate your delivery and or content. I know that differentiation is big in EduTalk at the moment. And don't emphasize formal assessment. This is a big sort of bugbear of mine. We tend to place too much emphasis on those, in my opinion. A single mark in the summative assessment is not a reflection of what students learned. So give frequent informal feedback. Talk of successes during lockdown, but also acknowledge that there were challenges. In terms of the task-based engagements, try to explain why the task, why the students are doing that particular task. Prepare the students for the organization of the task. Actually tell them if it's 1, 2, 3 parts, what they're about to engage in. What are the difficulties and the tricks to look for in a task? You know, that's going to help students engage with it a little bit better. And if necessary, make the task more enjoyable. Jazz it up a little bit. And when I'm saying that, I'm saying this in the full knowledge that I'm not a great one to do that naturally. And so to jazz a task up is an effort I have to consciously think of. Flow, as in flow theory, is an ideal. As you might have seen on the slide, there were also some other positive emotions that would be conducive to good engagement with work. It's great if you can generate flow, but aim just for positive engagement. Challenging but achievable and autonomy driven and lead by example. Create positive relationships and tackle disagreements. Don't ignore them. And try to listen to somebody called Liam Printer and his podcast on the motivated classroom. This is a big source of the work that I do. Anyway, that is me for tonight. I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And until next time, I can see that there is a question from Stephen, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm impressed. It's kind of, especially in academia, I feel like there's people that learned to write that name, Csikszentmihalyi. I remember learning at one point how to spell it verbatim, but I've definitely never learned it or heard how to say it out loud. So very impressed by that.
Thank you very much. I copied and pasted it from, to be frank, to make sure that the spelling was going to be accurate.
Yeah, together, I can spell it, you can say it, will be a powerful duo.
Absolutely.
Brieri, which is similarly a complicated name to pronounce, and we'll be all good. Nice work. Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you.
Next up, we've got Phil Kamei, whose presentation is called Use It or Lose It, which is a very good point, well made. So over to you, Phil. Feel free to share your screen in if you need to.
Thank you so much. Surprising, even with the hundreds of days I've done with remote learning, I'm still clunky, but we'll get there. I presume that's coming up well. So thanks so much for that introduction, Stephen. I think part of my presentation this evening is on a mindset for the classroom. I think we can all appreciate that we haven't had to manage some of the behaviours, and particularly counterproductive behaviours, that we sometimes see within our classroom environments on an online environment. And we all can appreciate the deeply heuristic nature of what we actually do, and having a conscious awareness of how we tackle some of those behaviours as we return to the classroom. I'm particularly interested in emergence theory, and it talks about the complexity and interconnectedness of relationships, and particularly low-level interactions which form complex patterns and behaviours. It's a theory based on the work of Stephen Johnson, where he talks about the ant colony and the role of the queen, not as the chief architect of the eusocial environment of an ant colony, but rather the patterns that emerge from the cooperation between the ants. It's a fantastic piece of work, and I think it relates quite closely to what we do as teachers when we're tackling behaviours within the classroom. So tonight, I want to share a protocol. I want to share a protocol that has been designed to combat the illusion of connectivity. Stanley McChrystal talks about an age of connectedness where we've had technology to support the work we all do over the past months and year, and the illusion some of us may have around how interconnected we actually are with our digital devices. As we enter the classroom, and part of the conversation before the start of this evening was around the strange behaviours that are manifesting in our classroom that we just haven't seen in a remote learning environment. Really interesting to hear Olivier's presentation on Bandura, and I'm really interested in observational learning. Every school strives to create empathetic young people with deeply human skills to tackle the fourth industrial revolution. And I think this protocol offers us a pattern to actually enhance that. Situational awareness is really key to our work as classroom leaders everywhere, and the VUCA that we find ourselves navigating, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous circumstances of the educational landscape. The protocol serves to support us there as well. And finally, I'm really passionate about what I call classroom currency, and that is a amount of influence that every teacher possesses, and sometimes it's based on their previous experience or their reputation preceding them, and the amount of currency that you either debit or credit through positive or negative interactions with your students. So the protocol works like this. You need to be aware of your triggers, particularly negative triggers, negative stimulus. The protocol, the 4 bases that you can see there, from trigger, detachment, oscillate and execute, follow a rough outline of Goleman's 4 competencies within emotional intelligence. Being aware of your triggers is really important. We all have biases, but particularly when something occurs and you are negatively stimulated as a teacher, being aware of that is, I believe, a real key. The first component of the protocol is the detachment. When you detach from a situation, you buy out and you allow yourself to oscillate the situation so that you're able to effectively manage the situation at hand. Often, and I even fall victim to this occasionally, often we invest in a situation too emotionally, and that can actually create issues for us down the track. The oscillation is about recognizing what some of those triggers are through a really detached state, and then finally executing a procedure, policy, or strategy in accordance with your school. So a couple of key ideas under each of these bases of the protocol. The Japanese have a beautiful, or Japanese martial arts is a beautiful term, which I like to steal here, and it talks about mushin. Mushin roughly translates to no mind. And it's not a mindlessness, but it's a really high level of self-awareness where you're able to actually increase this field of view and tackle the situation in front of you in a non-biased or judgmental way. So having that really key self-awareness around your triggers through a state of mushin is the first step in tackling any negative behavior in a classroom. Enhancing your classroom currency is something I'm trying to do all the time. Remember, we're always either debiting or crediting classroom currencies. When we handle something a little bit clumsily or we fumble a situation, as we sometimes do in a dynamic classroom environment, we do debit our classroom currency. Students are always watching our interactions, whether it's with them or a peer. I think it's really key to have that in the back of your mind. Once I'm clearly detached from the situation, I'm able to empathetically manage the situation. Observational learning here is key. You will always have the eyes of the classroom on you. Sometimes it needs to be tactical. And what I mean by tactical is in certain situations, it will be very challenging to see it through the eyes of the young person. But having that tactical empathy builds the relationship. We want to switch out of that system 1 thinking, that limbic response, into what Kahneman talks about being our system 2 thinking, which is our cortex thinking. And then finally, the famous John Kennedy saying, if you are a Hawthorne fan, do something. Part of managing relationships and the dynamic classroom environment is making sure you're actioning something for the benefit of the interaction, even if that's what Bill Rogers calls tactically ignoring. So sometimes for certain situations, particularly low-level situations, it's key to tactically ignore. I will always follow up that tactical ignore with some kind of interaction later on. But for me, if you take anything away from this presentation, I absolutely love the adage or the philosophy, observe behaviour and ignore attitude. And I think if we're all doing that as we return to the classroom, we're certainly setting ourselves up and our students up for success. I know Stephen's a big edu reading fan. There's a couple of fantastic references there that I'd like to acknowledge this evening, as well as point you in the direction of some wonderful literature. So I hope there's been some value offered this evening. I haven't heard any questions come through, but I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Phil. Of those 6 books, which would you recommend for someone hard up on a budget?
I don't think you can go past Adam Grant, Think Again right now. Absolutely fantastic. You know what? Get into your library, make friends with the librarian and get all 6 if you can. But yeah, Think Again, Adam Grant.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Nice one, Phil. We've got a little bit of time. So what we might do is just check in with our peeps who are watching online and ask a couple of questions of you just to have in the back channel there. A question is, did your school modify and adjust the timetable to suit your remote teaching? And are they actually keeping that adjustment, or is it just a return to as normal when you've come back to school? Part of this back to face is actually having an opportunity to listen, hear and see what other schools are doing and what other structures and what we're actually learning from when we've come back from our remote learning. Are we going back to exactly the same as when we left it, and just being a bit more cognizant of our young people returning and thinking about their emotional needs and their needs in the classroom? Or are we making big changes and to school structures? And if so, what's working at your place and what's working for you? So our next presenter, Lauren, are you ready to go?
You better believe it.
Excellent. I'll turn my...
Okay. Let me get the right screen up, as always. Okay. Can everybody see that? I assume so. Today I'm going to talk about it's handy to have a plan C. I think one of the interesting things at the moment is that we've all come back to school and school's really great, but I don't know about anyone else's school. I'm sort of at the point at the moment where, well, what happens if one of our classes gets closed and we're back into remote for 7 days? What happens if I end up having, and what's happening at my school is, what if I've got immune compromised children who can't come back to school at the moment? What are the different options that are there to me? So we've started to have this discussion, and I just thought why I'm calling it bimodal and not hybrid. And this will sort of, I think, explain, because I think in a hybrid model, we would purposefully design some of our activities to be online and some of our activities to be face-to-face, and we would work through that. And it's purposefully designed in that way that some of our work's online and some of our work's, so some might be synchronous, some may be asynchronous, but we're not being asked to teach hybridly at the moment, because this is not a purpose-built thing. This is an emergency situation where we're actually being asked to teach in 2 modes. We're being asked to teach face-to-face, and we're being asked to teach a group of people who are at home or somewhere else. So I think that's an important thing of, there's lots of terms, but as close to what I think we're being asked to do, and we get asked to do lots of things, is we're being asked to teach bimodally, because it's not really hybrid at the moment. So before I start to talk about tools, and I have to put this in only because I think this is a checklist for how I work with technology, and I've spent my life working in a digital space. But when we start to do this, I just want this checklist of, have you started with your purpose and your pedagogy instead of the tech? And that's advice for life from Lauren Sayer in this space. Does the tech that we're going to ask our teachers or our students to use prevent great analog thinking and learning? How do I teach, and what kind of strategies are most effective within your classroom? And when we look at some different options in a second, that'll be clear, because some teachers teach really well at the front of the classroom. Other teachers move constantly. So what tool you choose will depend on that. What outcomes are you using? How do you already use technology in your classroom? And what are the competencies that my students have to use this technology? That bit tends to get forgotten. And there's the concept of people saying digital natives or how that works. And I have to say, there's always a gap in that space. So some hybrid options, not bimodal. So some that are purposeful, where we could design it where we're not having to teach in these two modes, is we could use a OneNote for class, and we could offer a remote delivery only, and then have an email check-in. And I'm working with some teachers and students that is the level that they're really comfortable with, and the students are comfortable in that. I've got some others that have gone, well, no, I actually want to see my student each week. And they're going, well, I'm going to do a OneNote, and I'm going to do a Zoom check-in once a week, but not with the whole class and doing it in two modes. I'm going to do it in a hybrid way, and I'm going to find a time where I can catch up with them and check for understanding. So there's sort of some hybrid options. So what are bimodal options? So these are just some ideas, and we're trying to provide resources at multiple price points as well, because as Stephen said before, we're budget conscious, and some people might not be budget conscious in an emergency sort of situation. But the easiest way would be to Zoom, Teams, WebEx straight from your desk. So you've got your laptop up and you are just live streaming your class. The issue with that usually is that you're standing back and without a headset. Well, with a headset, you are tethered to your desk. Now, if that's the way you teach, go for it. If that's not the way you teach, you might have to look at something else. So the most important thing when you're Zooming is usually not the visual of it, because we can share a screen or we can use our laptop. It's actually the audio. And we've been working with students a lot, and they're not too frustrated about not being able to see things. They're incredibly frustrated about not being able to hear things. So Zooming with a wireless headset or a pair of wireless headphones where you can hear the student, and there is a really good way to be able to do it. A step up from that would be Zoom with a wireless headset and a webcam so that you're not tethered to the front. Then a few people, and document cameras have dropped in price, but if you're one of the teachers that wants to write things and look at work samples or deconstruct a text, instead of just Zooming and sharing your screen in that way, a document camera. Now, document cameras have gotten to the point that you can buy a great little bendy ear one for $30. And what you do tend to find is if you go and hassle your science or your technology departments, there's quite a few of these roaming around schools that were purchased and have never been used. And in this bimodal environment, they're nice emergency things that you might be able to go and find. And then final at that very high-tech thing is what is a swivel? And people might go, well, what on earth is Lauren talking about with a swivel? So here's a swivel in one of our classrooms. This is a music classroom. So what it basically is, in really simple terms, is an iPad on a movable robot with a lanyard that's connected via Bluetooth with a mic. And there's a speaker on the desk. So there's our speaker on the desk. And so it is, if you've ever seen that episode of Family Guy where Phil is on the iPad as the robot and moving around, it's a bit like this. So a swivel is great for those classes where you are moving around, or if you're in a learning space which doesn't have a dedicated front of a classroom. So we have multiple classrooms at our school where they're in learning studios, in team teaching, so there isn't a dedicated front. So this is the tech that we're using in this bimodal way. And we've been using this since the start of this year because we've still got students the whole time who have been stuck overseas and can't get back yet. So we've got a girl who's in Bali and she hasn't been able to get back. So the swivel's another option. So I just thought this was a good little brainstorm. What I'm really keen for though is either via Twitter or via the chat right now, what is the options that you're using, and are you using it, or is there an expectation? So at our school, we don't have an expectation that you will Zoom every lesson. That is not it. The expectation is that if someone's at home, we will look at how we are ready to support them and what is the best option for that student and what is the best option for that teacher. So we're into that space of that. So I'd be really, really good about looking at that area and that chat. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm looking forward to jumping into the chat now and having a discussion. And I hope you've got a few different ideas of plan C, D, E, F, maybe G, which I think we're going to need to get through the final 8 weeks of the year.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Lauren. Makes me tempted to get the swivel back out at school. My one and only funny swivel story is we once used a swivel to record a staff meeting, and one of the presenters just vaguely gestured to it and said, "That's our principal watching." And for anyone that's used a swivel, it sort of tracks the monitor that's around a person's neck. So many people in the audience afterwards assumed that our principal somehow remotely tracking the robot and at points checking in the crowd and all those sort of things. So anyway, that's probably a joke that only me and Lauren can get as people that have used this swivel stuff a little bit. But yeah.
I will put the offer out that if anyone wants to see how they work and be a participant, send me a message on Twitter and I'm happy to just have you zoom in via a swivel so you get an understanding. But all of the other options, to be honest, that are low cost in that space tend to be the ones our teachers and students prefer. Don't underestimate a pair of wireless headphones and a cheap document camera. The feedback we've got from our students is they prefer that. They get a bit seasick from a swivel.
Yeah, nice. All right, so repeat that question again so the chat can follow along and I can as well. What's the question you'd like answered?
The question I'd like answered really is, what are the options you are looking at, either in a designed hybrid way or a bimodal way, to get us through the end of the year and further if we have to?
All right, beautiful. Thank you, Lauren. We're going to throw to Emma and I'll be typing that into the chat and meeting you all there to see what we're pursuing. So Emma, over to you.
Hi, it's always big coming on after Lauren, but I will definitely try my best. Just shared my screen. Hang on, let me move this. And oops, not sharing. Oh, sorry. Present. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is, when it loads, my name is Emma Endicott. I am a secondary school English teacher in Victoria and I teach on Wurundjeri lands. I'm really interested in, obviously, the English classroom, being an English teacher, and looking at the data behind our return to school. So as I was reading this awesome paper, if you haven't read it, you should definitely read it, called Human Rights and the Post-Pandemic Return to Classroom Education in Australia by A. Maguire and D. McNamara. They state that the return to classroom learning should be managed mindfully, acknowledging that the dislocation children have experienced since the onset of the pandemic will need to be processed, and that in many will experience challenges in adjusting to the new normal. And the phrase "the new normal" hasn't really sat right with me since the start of the pandemic. What is this new normal? What does it even mean? I think at the start of the pandemic, we were very worried about our students actually losing knowledge. And was that going to be the new normal building up? So, of course, I go to the data. I have a look at our NAPLAN results for the last year. So NAPLAN, if you are from overseas, is a literacy and numeracy test that all students in years 5, 6, 7 and 9 take in Australia. And you can have a quick overview of the results here. Students in year 3 and 5 This is in the 2021, so after the pandemic, after a year of remote learning. Their reading, spelling, and grammar in year 3 was actually significantly above the normal standard. And same in year 5, their reading and spelling is significantly above, the same with their numeracy. But what I'm more interested in here in this data is that there was no drop. There was no statistical difference at all between a 2018 base level and a 2021 after a pandemic. And if we just look a bit closer into the secondary school data, obviously that is what I'm interested in. In year 7 in Victoria, the state that I'm from, reading and numeracy, our students actually topped. And in year 9, nearly 20,000 year 9 students actually had a significant learning growth from their year 7 NAPLAN results, which really surprised me because we did have this rhetoric that our children are going to struggle, the kids are really not going to be able to thrive in remote learning. But the data that we have from this testing juxtaposes that. So statistically, the kids still learned. They still learned things. There was this no major loss of knowledge that a lot of us feared for. And most students statistically showed growth, even though we were still in lockdown, which this started to really fascinate me. I was like, okay, let's actually have a look at what our students did online. This is anecdotally, also talking to a lot of colleagues. I have taught at 2 schools over the pandemic, one in rural Victoria and one in metropolitan Melbourne. So our NAPLAN tests in Australia for English only assess reading, writing, spelling, and grammar skills. And online, especially for schools who didn't have amazing remote learning capabilities, they did a lot of independent reading, not just in English, but also reading class instructions for other classes, reading class text for other classes, and especially in English. And then the students also did a lot of writing too, giving us answers so we could check that they were still learning and growing. And spelling and grammar was exposed to every day through typing and spell check, which then made me think though, obviously English is more complex than that. So what did we really miss? So if we have a look at the Victorian curriculum, and I'm assuming that a lot of curriculum will be the same, the Victorian curriculum gets us to learn to listen, read, view, speak, write, create, and reflect on increasingly complex and sophisticated spoken, written, and multimodal text. So our children really did miss out on speaking a lot. I know anecdotally, a lot of my students really missed out on the opportunity to speak. There was a lack of speaking, a lack of socialization, a lack of collaboration, and a lack of reading social cues. Of course, online teaching can do lots, and lots of children thrived in this, but can it really truly replace these things that are so vital to so many students? So where to from here? Let's have a look at what we can actually do in the English classroom to build up those skills that we have lost. So oral presentations obviously gives back that routine of standing in a classroom, presenting, that sense of normality. If we're looking at more of 21st century learning, there's also podcasting that can be done solely if you're wanting to get those skills back, but it can also be done in groups where students need to be collaborative with each other and learn from each other. And of course, we have group presentations, which really brings back in that negotiating of skills, reading other people, reactions, planning, just working with each other and picking up on those skills. Of course, students did do collaboration online. They are, like Lauren said, digital natives, but really, let's just get them talking back in the classroom. They're my references. Take a screenshot if you need them, but thank you so much for having me, everyone.
Thank you. Beautifully done. Something I've definitely been telling everyone about over and over again, about how Victoria's done good. Pay the teachers more, in brackets. That's the in brackets. So don't worry about that. Alrighty. So we've got a little bit of discussion kicking off there, which is the idea in the chat. So we've got John's talking about the year 3 domains that we did well in, or that the testing did well in, as well as his daughter. That's really good to see. Yeah, specific things, as Charlotte said, are definitely easy. Some are easier than others, and there's a real dilemma there, I guess, because some are very easy to work on and some are quite challenging. and obviously the social being a big part of that. But yeah, I mean, if you had have said when we started the possibility of remote learning in lockdown and all those sort of things, that somehow Victorian students would have both the longest lockdown globally, but also lead at least in one element of testing in Victoria and around Australia, yeah, I would be disagreeing with myself from the past for that. So next up, we've got Helwyn. Helwyn, when you're ready, come in and join us.
Hello. So completely different, no slides, no nothing. My perspective is of students wanting to come back, and they've got the two things they really want. A, they want to hang with their mates, which is totally fair enough. But two, they want to study and they're freaking out. How, like, you know, it sort of conflicts. So today I was talking to students saying, well, what are you doing to study? And the old classic cue cards came out. So this is a way to play hard, which was the title of my presentation. Completely forgot. Play hard, don't work hard. Though this actually does make your brain work hard. So you get all your cue cards, you've got all your stuff. Then in your buddy group, you present the answer and your buddy has to present the question. It's that flipping it around in a playful style, but it really shows what you know, what you don't know. It means you can hang out with your mates and you're still playing hard, but you're not working hard all alone. In my language classes, we're doing a lot of movement because, like someone before me said, and I've had a brain fog here, people want to get up and move around. They're used to being able to move around as much as they want. So we'll quite regularly, I'll just suddenly go, meaning get up and swap chairs. So we're using target language, something really familiar, but you've got to see the cue, you've got to act on the cue, which means you're paying attention, you're getting to move, and you're playing hard with the language you're immersing, rather than now we're going to learn about this, and now we're going to learn about this. So the game of reverse is also really good for groups. I've seen this done really niftily where you've got the answer, say DNA, alleles, whatever for biology, and then the three people who are making up questions, you pick which you thought was the best question. So everybody's getting to think about how you could think about the answer. Oh, time goes quick. I'm really lucky. I happen to own a lot of conversation dice. So if you're practicing what Emma was talking about, actually getting to interact, it's a really good way to interact when you've forgotten the art of eye contact and you've forgotten the art of turn taking. And people are, you know, they've lost those friendships and they're rebuilding new ones. So again, playing hard, not working hard, but using those old systems of study and then sort of tweaking them slightly so that you can play. I promised it would be short and sweet. I didn't lie. Thank you very much for listening. They were just some quick ideas on how, now that we're back together, we can interact and keep moving and keep playing. Where's she gone? Monique?
Here I am. I liked all that intentional physicality and presence and conversation that you had in your ideas. Thank you so much, because we've had so much focus on the digital, the computing, and it's just so good to hear those intentional ideas that even though you're using cue cards, you're starting conversation about content even before. If students are awkward socially, we can just talk and chat about our work to get started.
And if you're buddies with your VCE mates and you're thinking, but I'm not allowed to talk to them, this is a great way to have a controlled conversation so no one's going to get upset with you because you're working hard, playing hard.
Nice. Thanks for those.
No worries. Thank you.
Yeah, and can you believe it? Lucky last. Alex.
Evening.
When you're ready, share in. Get
Cool.
going.
Okay, I think I'm sharing now. Yep, awesome. Good evening, everyone. I'm noticing a bit of a theme coming out, and I think this will add to that a little bit, connecting and conversation. So my education background is as a primary classroom teacher, and a core belief that drives my own learning is that I think everyone deserves to have a positive school experience, and by everyone I'm thinking about teachers, students and the wider community. And so with the return to face-to-face, I just wanted to share a few ideas around mathematical joy, which I hope will be useful. So things that spark joy undoubtedly differ across different people, and the same would be in maths. But I do just want to share a few professional learning discoveries that sparked a lot of joy for me personally, as someone who formally identified as maths anxious, both as a learner and a teacher. So mathematical joy, what might it look like, sound like, feel like? Let's start with a myth. Oh, what's happened? All right, myth. Myth one, people are either good at maths or they're not. And this was something that I believed for a very long time, and I think it kind of seeped into my teaching a little bit too, with some of the kind of body language and perhaps some of the language that I used. And so probably about 6 or 7 years ago, discovering ucubed.org, which is leading a maths revolution around the world and really shifting mindsets and perceptions around maths and introducing brain science and growth mindset ideas into the maths classroom, was quite revolutionary for me. I learned a lot. So if you happen to teach maths, or if this is something that's interesting to you, I really recommend checking out this website. There's a bunch of videos, posters, research articles. It's a really nice place to start if you're looking at some of these sorts of ideas. So myth one, busted, everyone can learn maths to high levels. Myth two, there is one right way to solve a number problem. And this is something that I believed as an adult, as I'm doing my bookkeeping, as I was working in shops at university. I'd be trying to solve calculations with calculators and the vertical algorithm method all of the time. And it would be a painful process. I wouldn't really ever trust my process when I solved problems this way, and I probably made a bunch of mistakes and then had to check it on the calculator and all that kind of thing. So it was sort of just a painful process, but it was the way that I thought you had to solve number problems. I think it was just something that was a real key message through my schooling and life in general. And so as a teacher, learning how to teach mental computation to year fours actually started to open up the world of numbers and possibilities for me. So we'll just take a look at this first addition problem, 33 plus 28. And as you can see there, that answer is completely blown out, and it's just a matter of a mistake in the process and no mathematical reasoning present. But if we take a look at that addition problem and we look at it and we think about other ways of solving it so that we can be more confident about the answer, so that we can be thinking about the numbers and what they mean, and just kind of, I guess, being in tune with what's happening in this problem. Maybe something that I might decide to do is break up the 28 into 25 plus 3. And maybe you can guess that I want to add that 3 to the 37 to make 40, so that I can add these numbers up a little bit more easily. I've got my multiples of 10 there. 40 plus 25 is 65. Or maybe I could look at it a bit differently and add a 2 to the 28 to make it 30, so that I could just add 37 and 30 to get 67, and then take that 2 off again to get 65. So discovering that there are lots of different ways to solve problems, and that we can make choices about ways that kind of make sense to us, was one of the things that I discovered teaching year 4. And a pedagogical approach, if this is something that appeals to you, is Number Talks. It very much looks into this. It's about gathering kids together. They solve problems in different ways, just like those examples there. And they talk about it and they share and they listen. And I feel like this, the return to face and having kids in the same room talking about mathematics is going to be such a valuable thing to be doing at times when that fits into the program. So myth number 3, in maths, there is only ever one right answer. So we just looked at a problem where there is one right answer, but there are different ways of solving the problem. But sometimes there are mathematical there's mathematical thinking or questions where there isn't just one answer. And you may or may not have seen this, but it's a fantastic routine. It's one called Which One Doesn't Belong? Like a number talk, it's a maths talk, but we have a look at 4 objects and we think about which one of them doesn't belong. And it might be, and we talk about the top left, the top right, the bottom left, the bottom right, and the reasons why. So we might look at it and think about numbers. We might be thinking about odd numbers or even numbers, or we might be thinking about the fact that I can subitize, which means I can look and know instantly how many there are for the top, for all of them except for the limes. That's the only one that I feel like I need to count and break up. So maybe that's the odd one out for that reason. Or maybe I'm drawn to symmetry and I'm looking at lines of symmetry and thinking about the fact that, I can count lines of symmetry in all except for the bottom left. There's a lot of uncertainty around how many lines of symmetry there are. So it's a really nice opportunity to have different people contributing different ideas and having more than one correct answer, which isn't something that many of us attach to mathematics. And that for me brought a lot of joy to realize that there were these opportunities to ask questions that would have many, many answers and that could keep conversations going. And that we're moving away from just answering a question and being done. There is a bunch of different which one doesn't belong prompts. If that's something you want to explore, there's a website that's on the screen there that you can head to across all areas of the maths curriculum. And there's plenty of blog posts and people that are talking about how they use them in their classroom as well. I know that I've gone a little bit over time, so I'm just going to quickly scoot through this last bit. So the pedagogical approach there for Which One Doesn't Belong is open-ended maths talks. Which One Doesn't Belong is an example of an open-ended maths talk that has multiple correct answers and that can create conversations for making connections, both socially and mathematically as well. The last thing I just wanted to draw attention to is concrete materials. It's not something that kids have had access to. So if you're in a classroom where you've got access to concrete materials, really making use of some of the websites that have great task recommendations like enrich.maths.org. We also at Maths Teacher Circles just send emails with maths teaching ideas as well. So you can check that out if you like as well. But there's lots of great stuff online for really bringing mathematical joy to the forefront. So run tasks that feature concrete materials, and that's sort of for all students. So I'm just trying to see if I think I am right at the end. Yeah, mathematical joy. Sorry, I went over time, but what might it look like, sound like, and feel like? I hope you have a wonderful time exploring some fun stuff in the classroom on your return to face-to-face. All the very best.
That's a bit of a reoccurring theme, having that intentional fun, isn't it, from some of our presenters tonight, being really intentional about what we're planning. And you've gotten some nice affirming comments, Alex, on YouTube of some love hearts for maths and people loving the myth busting that you did at the start. So thanks so much. I think what we're all going to do is turn our cameras on and maybe do a bit of around the Brady Bunch screen of what we're looking forward to about coming back to face-to-face and what we're really positive and happy about being back at school and being back on site. And we'd like you to do the same to wrap up our YouTube channel chat to make sure that we end on some positives. And yeah, so thanks to all the presenters that did. And who's going to kick us off? Phil. Right in there, let's go.
You know what? I really get a lot of energy from the kids. I'm an extrovert. I feed off other people's energy, and I'm sure we all stared at little pictures of students via Teams or Zoom or WebEx, whatever it may be. So energy of the kids for me.
I'm just so happy to see smiling faces. I'm very sick of just reading their names on a screen. So being able to actually see their faces and tell terrible jokes has been just incredible.
I'm looking forward to discussions where we don't bump into each other on Zoom because we can't work out verbal cues. I'm really looking forward to those sorts of professional discussions where, and that was what I was going to say in terms of I'm looking forward to great teacher discussions back about practice and being able to debrief lessons again, where you do it as part of the natural way of working. You don't have to make an intentional phone call in order to do that. And what I would like to see in the future is that the one thing I will miss is having my dog with me all the time, but I think that schools should allow my dog to come in to work with me.
As a language teacher, perhaps it's pretty obvious why I want to return. I tried to do a language class online is an interesting exercise. But I think but perhaps I will just turn my answer there more towards what Phil said a little bit earlier about the energy, because I just want to tell you this very, very short story of seeing my year 9s for the first time yesterday. And I had this full lesson plan ready for them, and I was rearing to start the lesson. But these kids just sat down, and with their big smile on their faces, they immediately started to just chat among themselves. And I was like, should I interrupt this, or should I just let it go for a little bit? And then so they just chatted for 15 minutes, and I joined in, and there were little groups chatting here and there, and it was such an amazing positive feeling. So that's possibly what I'm looking forward to the most, is this energy that the students are bringing when we are actually together in the classroom. That's what yeah.
Definitely. Do you want to jump in, Alex? Any thoughts? Or you're not in the classroom?
I'm not in the classroom right now, but I can relate to the difficulty of running, because I have run number talks and things like that remotely in Zoom and and it's not the same. So I can just empathize so much with teachers returning and just being able to sit in a group and have that shared discussion, kids making eye contact, and I can just really empathize with how wonderful that probably is going to be, along with the challenges it may bring as well. But I'm excited for that. Yeah.
Is it me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll give a vinaigrette. These kids have worked hard, and a lot of them don't get that they've worked hard. So they came back today, and at the end of the class, I said to one girl, "So what did you learn new today?" She said, "Oh, nothing. I knew all that." And then she looked so shocked, because in her brain, she doesn't know anything, or not that she doesn't know anything, but she's, at the bottom of the pile. And then she suddenly realized, oh, I knew all of that. She was working in second language and not even noticing, because, I know all of that. So to me, that's really exciting, getting them to join the dots and just go, I've worked really hard. Now I get to play with it. So that was cool.
I'm looking forward to reading the cues of a room, because I rely on that to initiate my next step in teaching. And it's so difficult to initiate that from students in Zoom and Teams in a chat. And lots of students don't want to tell you how they're going. And in a room, we know that because we're working with them and alongside them, and they don't have to admit that they don't know, or they're finding something challenging, or they want your support and they want you to work with them. So I'm looking forward to knowing my next step as a teacher, because I'm in the room with them.
Well, for me, I don't know. I'm remembering, wow, how physical it is to be a teacher. Like how often I'm walking around on my knees, or kind of, hovering over a student, and they're doing that classic teacher thing of like, which shoulder is he going to talk to me? And, all those things that you just sort of forget, that are kind of part of the sort of, the physical grammar of being a teacher. And yeah, the smiling faces, as Olivia said. I guess for me, I'm just, what a wonderful night on a Wednesday night after a hard day of teaching, to see the Brady Bunch back together as it continues to evolve. It's been fun. And what's next, Monique? What's our plan? What's the next one?
We dropped some ideas about one based on research use in schools. So maybe this is a bit of a call out for anyone that's doing great things. We also wanted to maybe push the boundaries of how the Teach Meet was run, maybe even have some breakout rooms and some collaboration with our presenters, sharing knowledge. So that sounds like something that you'd be interested in. You can find Steve or I on Twitter, and you can drop a friend in and maybe suggest them as well.
I'm just
Maybe you'd
thinking
like to host.
maybe it could be bimodal. Could get the swivel out, make it, I don't know how that would work, but I'm sure New South Wales did it for years, Monique, before it was cool. Is that right?
Always.
In all things. All right. Well, I guess that's almost bang on 9 o'clock. That's a nice early evening for most teachers of a work day. So I'll be hitting on with some marking because that's how we roll. Monique, any final thoughts? Anyone want to chip in for any final 2 cents?
Thank you to everyone that's joined, shared, contributed, jumped on the chat, retweeted, thanked. Awesome. Legends. Thank you, everyone.
Beautiful. Thank you.